On Thanksgiving morning, my family pushed me out into the cold and shut the door behind me. My father looked me straight in the eyes and said I didn't belong to them anymore, while my sister stood just behind him, smiling like she'd been waiting for this moment. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I took my child's hand and walked away. But before the day was over, I made one quiet move that turned their celebration into silence. And by the time they realized what I'd done, it was already too late to undo it. Before I tell you how that morning unraveled everything I thought I knew about family, do me a small favor, stay with me, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps these stories travel farther than silence ever could. I'm Alara Winter, and until that Thanksgiving, I believed distance was the worst thing my family could do to me. I didn't yet understand how deliberate exclusion could be sharper than outright cruelty. The morning started earlier than it needed to. I woke before my alarm, the gray, Briarhaven light barely filtering through the blinds of my apartment at Ridgeview Flats. The air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and cinnamon from the night before. Mira, my daughter, was still asleep, curled around her stuffed fox, one sock kicked off in the way she always did. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer than usual, watching her chest rise and fall, telling myself that today mattered, that showing up still mattered. I had spent the previous week rehearsing this day in my head, not the conversations but the posture, calm, gracious, unbothered, the kind of composure that makes other people uncomfortable when they're hoping for a reaction. Thanksgiving at the Winter House on Hollowcrest Drive had always been complicated, but I convinced myself that this year would be different, that maybe enough time had passed, that maybe the years of softened language and selective memory had finally worked. I dressed Mira in the blue sweater her teacher had complimented the week before and tied her hair with a ribbon she insisted was lucky. She asked if Grandma Helene would like the drawing she made. I said yes without thinking, then swallowed the word before it could harden into a lie. We packed a small bag with the pie I'd baked the night before and a book Mira wanted to show her cousin. Normal things. Peace offerings disguised as tradition. The drive across Briarhaven was quiet. Ashwood District looked almost gentle that morning, frost clinging to the trees like lace. Mira hummed to herself in the back seat, oblivious to the way my hands tightened on the steering wheel as we turned onto Hollowcrest Drive. The Winter House came into view, tall and familiar, every light on, as if warmth could be staged. I parked where I always used to, out of habit, out of hope. Mira unbuckled herself and grabbed the pie carefully like it was fragile. I remember noticing how steady she was. Children often are, until adults teach them not to be. We walked up the steps together. I knocked once, then again. The door opened quickly, like they'd been waiting. My father, Roland Winter, stood there in his pressed sweater, expression already set. Not surprised, not conflicted. Behind him, the house buzzed with voices and clinking dishes. I caught a glimpse of Helene near the kitchen island, her back turned. Sabine leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Roland didn't invite us in. "Alara," he said like my name was an inconvenience. "You shouldn't have come." I looked past him, instinctively scanning for somewhere to set the pie. There was no space made. "We talked about this," he continued, voice low but firm. "This isn't appropriate anymore." Mira squeezed my hand. I felt it before I heard her whisper, "Mom?" I knelt down so we were eye level. "It's okay," I said softly. Then I stood and looked back at my father. "We're just here to say hello. We won't stay long." That's when he said it. "You don't belong to us anymore." Not shouted, not dramatic, just delivered, clean and final, like a conclusion he'd rehearsed. Behind him, Sabine smiled. I didn't ask why. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him of the years I showed up when others didn't. The hospital nights at North Spire Medical Center. The holidays I salvaged. The excuses I made for them when Mira asked questions too big for her age. I simply nodded. I set the pie down on the porch. I took Myra's hand again, and I walked away. The door closed before we reached the bottom step. In the car, Myra stared straight ahead. Did I do something wrong? No, I said immediately. Too quickly. You didn't. We drove away without music, without conversation, just the sound of tires on pavement and the weight of something finally breaking free. Back at Ridgeview Flats, I helped Myra out of her coat and set her up with markers at the kitchen table. She drew quietly, tongue tucked between her teeth in concentration. I watched her for a moment, then picked up my phone. I didn't write a post. I didn't explain. I didn't tag anyone. I shared one image. The porch. The pie untouched. The closed door. No caption. I set the phone face down and went back to Myra. That was all. I didn't know yet how loud silence could be when it finally answers back. The silence didn't come all at once. It arrived in layers, like snowfall you don't notice until the ground disappears. I didn't check my phone for the rest of the afternoon. Myra colored, asked for snacks, curled up on the couch to watch a movie she'd already seen twice. I followed her lead. We made grilled cheese. We laughed at the wrong parts. I let the normality settle around us like a shield. But underneath it, something had changed. That evening, after Myra fell asleep, I finally picked up my phone. The screen lit up with notifications stacked so tightly they blurred together. Missed calls, messages, group chat pings I hadn't heard in years. I didn't open them right away. I sat at the edge of my bed and stared at the wall across from me, the one I still hadn't hung anything on since moving into Ridgeview Flats. Bare walls used to bother me. Now they felt honest. When I finally unlocked the phone, the first message wasn't from my parents. It was from Marcus. Why did you leave early? I read it twice. The phrasing wasn't concern. It was confusion, mild irritation. As if I'd broken protocol. I didn't answer. The family group chat was next. The one I was technically still part of, though no one ever spoke to me directly in it anymore. Helene had sent a message 20 minutes after I posted the photo. Elara, we need to talk. This isn't appropriate. Sabine followed. You didn't have to make it public. Public. I scrolled up. No one had mentioned the door, or the words my father said, or the fact that Myra had been standing right there. Just optics. I locked the phone again and set it down. That night I dreamed of doors. Some locked, some open, all of them familiar. The next morning, Briarhaven woke under a pale sky. Thanksgiving leftovers sat untouched in my fridge. I made toast and coffee while Myra got dressed, humming again, as if yesterday hadn't redrawn the shape of her world. At school drop-off, her teacher smiled warmly and said, I hope you both had a lovely holiday. I smiled back. We did, I said. And for the first time, it wasn't a lie. At work, I tried to focus. Emails blurred together. Numbers lost meaning. Around noon, Nissa Calder texted, Are you okay? I stared at her name longer than necessary. Nissa had seen everything over the years. She knew how my family worked. How silence was their favorite weapon. I typed I am now, and meant it. By mid-afternoon, the calls started again. Roland, Helene, Marcus. Unknown numbers I recognized anyway. I ignored them all. At exactly 4:17 p.m., my phone rang again. This time I answered. What do you want? I asked, keeping my voice level. Helene inhaled sharply on the other end. Elara, this has gone too far. Has it? I asked. You embarrassed us, she said. People are asking questions. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. People should ask questions. There was a pause. I could almost see her lips pressing together, recalculating. You didn't have to involve Myra, she said finally. I laughed once. Short. Sharp. You shut the door in her face. That's not what happened, she replied quickly. Then tell me what did, I said. Silence. I hung up. That night, Nissa came over with takeout and wine. We sat on the floor because neither of us felt like pretending the couch was comfortable. "You knew this would happen," she said gently. "Yes," I admitted, but I didn't know how freeing it would feel. She nodded. "They're losing control of the story." That word landed hard. Story. Because that was it. They had always controlled the narrative. The gracious parents, the complicated daughter, the misunderstood choices, the omissions. And now there was proof. Quiet, undeniable proof. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. "Leora Winter, I saw your post. I'm so sorry. I always wondered why you stopped coming around." I stared at the message. Then another arrived. A former neighbor. A distant cousin. Someone who used to babysit me. The same pattern. Curiosity turning into recognition. I didn't respond to all of them. I didn't need to. Their questions did the work for me. By the end of the week, the air around my family felt different. Heavier. Less certain. The confidence they'd always carried cracked just enough for doubt to seep through. On Friday evening, Marcus showed up at Ridgeview Flats unannounced. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "You really stirred things up," he said, hands in his pockets. "You mean I stopped covering for you?" I replied. He frowned. "You know how Dad is." "Yes," I said. "I do." "And Mom's taking this hard," he added. I tilted my head. "So did Mira." That shut him up. "You could have handled it privately," he said after a moment. I smiled. "I tried. For years." He looked past me into the apartment where Mira was coloring at the table. "She doesn't need to be in the middle of this." "She already was," I said calmly. "You just never noticed." Marcus exhaled. "So what now?" I thought about it. "Now," I said, "I stopped pretending." He left without another word. That night, after Mira went to bed, I opened my laptop and created a folder. I named it simply Record. I uploaded screenshots, messages, the photo from the porch, the group chat responses, dates, times, not because I planned to do anything with them, but because I was done forgetting. The following week, something unexpected happened. Roland didn't call. Neither did Helene. The silence this time wasn't dismissive. It was strategic. I knew that pause, the one where they regrouped, reframed, decided how to present themselves once the dust settled. I let them. On Wednesday, I received an email from a local community board I volunteered with years ago. Subject: question regarding recent concerns. My stomach tightened. Inside was a carefully worded message asking if I was still available to serve on an advisory committee, noting that some questions had been raised about my family situation. I read it twice. Then I replied with a single sentence. "Yes, and I'm happy to clarify anything directly." They never asked again. That was the moment I understood something important. The truth doesn't need defending when it's documented. On Thanksgiving weekend's final night, Mira crawled into my bed and whispered, "I like our house better." "Why?" I asked. "Because no one tells us to leave," she said. I held her tighter, and somewhere across Briarhaven, I knew a table sat quieter than planned, chairs filled with people pretending nothing had changed. But it had, and they felt it. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was calculated. I recognized it because I'd lived inside it my whole life. When the Winters went silent, it wasn't because they had nothing to say. It was because they were deciding what version of events would survive. I went about my days as usual, took Mira to school, answered emails, cooked dinners that smelled like safety. But underneath it all, I felt the pressure building, like a storm waiting for the right excuse to break. That excuse came sooner than I expected. It started with a phone call from an unfamiliar number just after lunch on Monday. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Is this Leora Winter?" a woman asked, professional but hesitant. "Yes," I said. "My name is Paige. I'm calling from North Spire Medical Center. We're updating our emergency contact records and noticed some inconsistencies." My chest tightened. "What kind of inconsistencies?" There was a pause, papers rustling. According to our system, your father listed you as his primary emergency contact. But there's a note requesting confirmation, as another family member flagged it as outdated. I closed my eyes. Sabine, I haven't been informed of any changes, I said carefully. I understand, Paige replied. We just need to verify whether you should remain on file. I pictured my father in that hospital bed years ago, gripping my wrist in the dark while monitors beeped too fast. I remembered how I stayed when no one else did. Yes, I said. I should remain. Thank you, she said. We'll note that. When the call ended, I sat very still. They weren't just trying to control the story anymore. They were rewriting logistics. That afternoon, Nissa stopped by my office. She didn't knock. She never did when she sensed something was wrong. They're circling, she said, dropping into the chair across from me. I know, I replied. She slid her phone across the desk. On the screen was a post from a neighborhood group page. Thankful for family this season. Some bonds just don't hold. No names. No tags. But I recognized Helene's phrasing instantly. The passive voice. The implication without accusation. They're framing you, Nissa said. They always have, I replied. They're just louder now. That night, I opened the folder labeled record again. And this time I went further back. Old emails. Archived messages. Calendar entries from years I'd tried to forget. I didn't read them emotionally. I read them like evidence. Patterns emerged quickly. Who was invited? Who wasn't? Who was praised publicly? Who was corrected privately? How often my name appeared only when something needed handling. By midnight, I had filled 3 subfolders. Exclusion. Redirection. Silence. I slept poorly. The next morning, I dropped Mira off at school and noticed a flyer taped near the entrance. Family feast. Community. Thanksgiving recap. Photos from the neighborhood celebration the Winters had attended. I didn't look at them closely. I didn't need to. At work, my inbox filled with subtle questions. Colleagues asking if I was okay. Someone forwarding me a link just in case. That link led to a blog post. Anonymous. Local. Titled, When Adult Children Weaponize Holidays. I read every word. The writer spoke about ingratitude. About boundaries being misunderstood. About parents doing their best and children rewriting history for attention. It wasn't signed, but the cadence was unmistakable. Helene. I forwarded it to Nissa with one line. They've escalated. Her response came immediately. Then you document louder. The opportunity came 2 days later. A letter arrived at Ridgeview Flats. Thick envelope. Formal return address. Lockridge and Hale, LLP. My stomach dropped. Inside was a notice requesting my presence at a mediation session regarding family matters and shared understandings. Shared understandings. I laughed out loud. They wanted to control the fallout before it spread further. I called Evan Lockridge directly. I didn't request this, I said. I know, he replied calmly, but you're listed as an interested party. Do I have to attend? No, he said. But you might want to see what they're trying to settle. That word again. Settle. I told him I'd think about it. That evening, Mira sat at the kitchen table drawing. She held up her paper proudly. It was a house. 2 stick figures. And a door wide open. This is us, she said. See? No one locks it. Something in my chest loosened painfully. Later that night, my phone buzzed. Sabine. I stared at her name for a long time before answering. What do you want? I asked. She sighed theatrically. You've made things very uncomfortable. For whom? I asked. For everyone, she said. Mom's been crying. I waited. You didn't have to post that photo, she continued. You made us look bad. You shut the door in my child's face, I said. You did that all by yourself. That's not how it happened, she snapped. Then tell me how it did, I said. Silence. She changed tactics. You know Dad's health isn't great. You know I was there when it mattered, I replied. Another pause. We're asking you to come to mediation, she said finally. To clear the air. To do what? I asked. Pretend. She exhaled sharply. You always have to make things dramatic. I smiled. I learned from the best. She hung up. The next day, I received another email, this time from Briarhaven Elementary. Subject: Family Contact Update. My heart sank. They were updating records. Emergency contacts. Permissions. Someone had requested changes. I drove straight to the school. Mrs. Alden met me in her office. Concern etched across her face. We received a request to adjust Myra's approved pickup list. From whom? I asked, already knowing. She hesitated. Your sister. I'm her legal guardian, I said calmly. No one else has authority. I know, Mrs. Alden said quickly. That's why we flagged it. I nodded. Thank you. On the drive home, my hand shook for the first time in weeks. This wasn't about holidays anymore. This was about control. That night, I made a decision. I called Evan Lockridge back. I'll attend, I said, but not to reconcile. Understood, he replied. Then to document. Exactly. The mediation was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing, not emotionally but practically. I printed everything. Emails, screenshots, hospital records, school forms, timelines. I labeled each section carefully. When Tuesday arrived, I dressed simply. No armor, no softness, just clarity. The conference room at Lockridge and Hale was cold and bright. Roland and Helene sat together on one side of the table, Sabine beside them. Marcus was absent. They looked surprised when I walked in. Not relieved, not grateful. Surprised. Roland cleared his throat. We hoped you'd come. I'm here, I said. Let's be accurate. The mediator began with pleasantries. I let them speak first. Helene talked about misunderstandings, about feelings, about how social media complicates family matters. Roland said I'd always been independent, that they assumed I preferred distance. Sabine said nothing, just watched. When it was my turn, I slid the folder across the table. I'm not here to argue memories, I said. I'm here to correct records. I opened to the first page. The hospital calls, the school forms, the exclusion emails, the porch photo, the blog post timestamps, the attempted contact changes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I let the facts do what facts always do when placed under light. The room changed. The mediator stopped taking notes and started reading. Helene's lips parted, then pressed together. Roland stared at the table. Sabine shifted in her seat. I don't want an apology, I said finally. I want boundaries and documentation that you understand them. The mediator nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. Sabine scoffed. This is excessive. I met her eyes. So was erasing us. The session ended without resolution, but it didn't matter. I had what I needed. As I left the building, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You don't know what you've started. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because for the first time, the silence ahead of me didn't feel like a threat. It felt like leverage. I didn't realize how much energy it took to be careful until I stopped trying. After the mediation, something shifted, not in them, but in me. The fear that once made me second-guess every step was gone. In its place was something steadier. Intent. The days that followed were quieter on the surface. No calls. No emails. No passive-aggressive posts slipping through side channels. It was the kind of calm that comes after people realize their usual tactics no longer work. But silence doesn't mean retreat. It means regrouping. I focused on Mira, on routines, on rebuilding the kind of normal that doesn't depend on permission. We walked to school instead of driving. We baked on Wednesday nights. She started leaving her drawings on the fridge without asking first. One evening, as I was cleaning out a drawer in the living room, I found something I'd forgotten about entirely. An old external drive. It was scratched, unlabeled. The kind of thing you keep through 3 moves because throwing it away feels like losing something you haven't processed yet. I plugged it into my laptop out of curiosity more than intention. Inside were folders dated years back. Photos, scans, documents, and a subfolder labeled House. My breath caught. I clicked it open. There were pictures of the winter house from before the renovations Sabine always took credit for. The chipped tile, the half-painted fence, the garden beds that never quite bloomed the way Helene wanted them to. Then I saw the files, receipts, invoices, my name. I sat back slowly. Years ago, long before Mira was born, I had contributed money to help keep the house from foreclosure. Quietly, without acknowledgement, Roland had framed it as temporary. Something he'd make right once things stabilized. I remembered the night clearly now, sitting at that same kitchen table, signing the transfer, being told it was family. I scrolled. Bank statements, emails confirming receipt, a message from Helene thanking me for saving us. My hands trembled, not from anger, but recognition. They hadn't just erased me emotionally. They had buried me financially. The next file made my stomach drop. A scan deed. Not the current one. The previous version. My name was listed as a co-holder. I stared at it for a long time. Then I started cross-referencing dates. The transfer. The renovation. The refinancing. The moment my name disappeared. It wasn't an accident. It was timed. I called Nissa. You need to see this, I said. She came over within the hour. We spread the papers across the floor, like a crime scene. They changed ownership after you paid, she said quietly. Yes, I replied. And they never told me. That's not just exclusion, she said. That's misrepresentation. I nodded. It was worse than I thought. The next morning, I called Evan Lockridge. I didn't explain. I just said, I found something. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Elara, he said carefully, this changes the frame entirely. How so? I asked. You're not just a family member they pushed out, he said. You're someone whose contribution was erased after the fact. What does that mean? I asked. It means, he replied, they assumed you'd never look. That afternoon, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo album. Old. The kind Helene used to keep on the coffee table. I opened it cautiously. Page after page had been altered. Photos removed. Spaces where images once were. On one page, a faint rectangle remained where a picture had been peeled away. I knew which one. The graduation photo. The one where Roland stood beside me, proud. I flipped to the back. A folded note fell out. In Sabine's handwriting. We're simplifying the past. It's healthier this way. I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. Simplifying. That night my phone rang. Marcus. I almost didn't answer. Did you know? I asked as soon as he spoke. Know what? He replied cautiously. About the house, I said. About the money. About my name being removed. There was a pause. Too long. You should talk to Mom, he said finally. I hung up. The next day, Evan called back. I pulled the records, he said. They transferred sole ownership to Sabine after refinancing. No compensation. No notification. That's legal. I asked. Questionable, he replied, but provable. I closed my eyes. For years, they'd painted me as dramatic, sensitive, detached. But the truth was simpler. They had taken what I gave and rewritten the story so they wouldn't have to account for it. That evening, as Mira worked on homework, I sat beside her with my laptop open and began organizing the files. I labeled the folder precisely. Hollow Crest property, contributions, and removal. I wasn't building a case. I was restoring a record. The message came just after midnight. From Helene. We should meet. Just us. I stared at it. Then I typed back. Bring the truth with you. She didn't reply. The following weekend, Briarhaven hosted a small winter fundraiser at St. Maro Community Hall. I hadn't planned to attend, but then Evan called. They're going to be there, he said. All of them. Good, I replied. So will I. I didn't go to confront. I went to observe. Helene saw me first. Her smile faltered. Roland stiffened. Sabine avoided my gaze entirely. People greeted me warmly, asked how Mira was, commented on the weather. Normal interactions. Nothing dramatic. Until someone asked the wrong question. So, a donor said casually, is it true you helped keep the winter house afloat years ago? The room stilled. Helene turned sharply. I smiled politely. Yes, I said. For a while. Silence spread outward like ripples. Sabine's face drained of color. Roland opened his mouth, then closed it. I excused myself shortly after. I didn't need to stay. The seed had been planted. That night, Mira asked, why did everyone look funny at the party? I kissed her forehead. Because sometimes, I said, truth walks in without knocking. She smiled sleepily. And somewhere, I knew my family felt the floor shift beneath them. They had erased me from photos, from rooms, from narratives. But they had forgotten one thing. I remembered everything. And now, so did the record. The first thing I noticed wasn't the calls. It was the way people started saying my name differently. Not louder. Not softer. Just with weight. The fundraiser incident didn't explode the way movies pretend these moments do. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. No glasses shattered on marble floors. Instead, it spread the way truth always does. Sideways, through whispers, through curiosity, through people comparing notes when they thought no one was listening. I didn't post anything else. I didn't clarify. I didn't correct assumptions. I went back to my routines, to Myra's lunches and school pickups, to work meetings and late-night tea. But the world around my family began to tilt. On Monday morning, Evan forwarded me an email thread. Redacted names but unmistakable tone. A board member asking why previous financial contributors were never acknowledged. Another asking why ownership records didn't align with renovation funding. Someone else asking, very carefully, whether there were documents they hadn't been shown. I didn't respond. By Tuesday afternoon, Sabine texted me for the first time in years. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. I stared at the message. Out of hand. As if the truth were an animal that had slipped its leash. I typed back only 3 words. You started this. She didn't reply. That evening, Mira brought home a permission slip for a winter field trip. I signed it, packed her bag, helped her choose which mittens to wear. Life kept moving. But under the surface, the silence grew brittle. Wednesday morning, I received a voicemail from Roland. Ilara, he said, voice low, careful. This has gone far enough. I deleted it without listening to the rest. An hour later, Helene emailed. Subject: Family Matters. The body was long, carefully constructed, apologetic in tone but evasive in substance. She wrote about misunderstandings, about timing, about how emotions had influenced decisions, about how I had always been independent and strong, how they assumed I didn't need acknowledgement the way others did. There it was again, the compliment that excused everything. I replied once. Assumptions don't replace consent. Then I archived the email. The real shift came on Friday. I was in the grocery store, Mira riding in the cart, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Almost. This is Callan Reeve, the voice said. I'm with the Ridgeway Legal Review Board. We've received a query regarding property disclosures connected to the winter house. I stopped walking. Yes, I said. Your name appears on an earlier deed. We're trying to understand the sequence of changes. I can help with that, I replied calmly. There was a pause. I thought you might, he said. When I hung up, Mira looked up at me. Are we still getting apples? Yes, I said. We're still getting apples. That night, Evan called. They've been contacted, he said. Officially. Good, I replied. They're scrambling, he added. Sabine's pulling favors. Helene's calling anyone who'll listen. And Roland? I asked. He's quiet, Evan said. Which means he's scared. I smiled faintly. The following morning, someone slipped a handwritten note under my apartment door. It was Helene's handwriting. Please, we can fix this. I stared at the paper for a long time. Fix. As if this were a broken vase and not a deliberate act. I didn't respond. By Sunday, the atmosphere in Briarhaven had changed completely. People who used to smile politely at Helene now avoided eye contact. Invitations were quietly rescinded. Conversations paused when she entered rooms. Sabine's social media went dark. Marcus stopped calling altogether. And Roland did something I didn't expect. He showed up, unannounced. Mira was at Nissa's place for the afternoon. The apartment was quiet. I opened the door and found him standing there, hands clasped in front of him like a man waiting for judgment. You look tired, I said. He nodded. I am. We sat at opposite ends of the couch. I never meant for this to happen, he said finally. That's not true, I replied. You meant for it to happen quietly. He winced. I thought, he said, choosing his words carefully, that if we simplified things, everyone would move on. I did move on, I said. You're the ones who couldn't let me exist outside your version of the story. He rubbed his face. They're asking questions now, he admitted. Legal ones. I know, I said. Sabine's furious, he added. She says you're trying to ruin her. I looked at him. Did I forge documents? No. Did I remove my own name? No. Did I take money and pretend it didn't exist? He didn't answer. I stood. You didn't lose me because I'm difficult, I said quietly. You lost me because you chose convenience over honesty. He looked up, eyes wet. What do you want? I considered that. I want the record restored, I said. Nothing more. Nothing less. He nodded slowly. I don't know if Sabine will agree. That's not my problem, I replied. He left without another word. 2 days later, the official notice arrived. A request for documentation. A timeline. An explanation. Evan handled the response. I focused on Mira. On school projects and winter jackets and bedtime stories. But even she noticed the shift. Why do people keep looking at you funny? She asked one evening. Because, I said gently, sometimes people realize they've been wrong. She thought about that. Do they say sorry? Not always, I replied. But do they stop? I smiled. Yes, I said. They usually do. By the end of the week, Sabine broke. She sent a message to the extended family group chat. There have been inaccuracies circulating. Legal counsel is involved. Please refrain from speculation. No one responded. Not one. I watched the silence unfold from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending the lie. That night, as I tucked Mira into bed, she asked, Are we in trouble? I kissed her forehead. No, I said. We're just done hiding. She smiled sleepily. And somewhere across town, doors were closing, not on me this time, but on the version of reality my family had tried to preserve. They had spent years erasing me, quietly. Now the erasure had been noticed. And there was no way to put me back into silence again. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, thin and formal, the kind that looks harmless until you read it twice. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from a bank. I stood at the kitchen counter, coffee cooling in my hand, as Mira hummed softly behind me, lining up her cereal pieces by color. The return address belonged to Crestfall Mutual, a name I hadn't seen in years. Subject: account irregularity, immediate attention required. My stomach tightened. I opened it slowly. According to the notice, I was listed as a secondary guarantor on a business loan that had defaulted. The amount wasn't small. It was the kind of number that made your chest feel hollow. I read the business name once, then again. Winter Performance Group. Sabine's company. The room went very quiet. I set the letter down carefully, as if sudden movement might make it worse. Mira looked up. "Mom," she asked, "did I do something wrong?" "No," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Not at all." I waited until she left for school before calling Evan. "This is it," I said when he answered. "They used my name." There was a pause. Then his voice hardened. "Send me a copy. Right now." By noon, Evan had confirmed what I already suspected. 3 years earlier, during Sabine's expansion push, my name had been added as a guarantor. My signature wasn't forged, not exactly. It was attached digitally to a packet I'd signed years before, when Roland asked me to help, temporarily, with paperwork while Sabine was out of town. I remembered the day now, sitting at that long dining table, signing without reading every page, trusting the people who told me family didn't need contracts. "They didn't just erase you," Evan said grimly. "They repurposed you." "What does that mean legally?" I asked. "It means," he replied, "they crossed from exclusion into fraud." The word settled heavily between us. Fraud. That afternoon the calls resumed. Sabine, Helene, Marcus, unknown numbers. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and added a new folder inside record. Guarantor misuse, Winter Performance Group. I uploaded the bank notice, the original signed packet, the timestamps, Evan's notes. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I felt something steadier, colder. That evening, as I helped Mira with homework, my phone buzzed again. "Sabine." I answered this time. "What did you do?" she snapped without preamble. "I documented the truth," I replied. "You had no right to escalate this," she said sharply. "You had no right to use my name," I shot back. "You signed," she said. "I trust it," I replied. "There's a difference." Her voice dropped. "If you push this, you'll ruin everything." I smiled faintly. "You already did." She hung up. The next day, Evan called early. "They've hired counsel," he said. "Aggressive." "Good," I replied. "They're claiming implied consent," he added. "Family assistance. Mutual benefit." "And the house?" I asked. He exhaled. "That's unraveling faster than they expected." By Thursday, Crestfall Mutual froze the account pending investigation. By Friday, Sabine's business partners began distancing themselves. And by Saturday, Roland left a voicemail I did listen to. "Elara," he said, voice trembling. "This is getting dangerous." I laughed softly. "It's already dangerous. You just weren't the one at risk before." That weekend, Briarhaven buzzed with speculation. People didn't ask me questions directly anymore. They asked around me, carefully, quietly. The version of my family that had relied on reputation now found itself scrutinized. On Sunday evening, Helene showed up. This time she knocked. I didn't invite her in. We stood in the hallway, the door open just enough to remind her she wasn't in control. "You're tearing us apart," she said, eyes glossy. "No," I replied. "I stopped holding you together." She flinched. "You always wanted distance," she accused. "You never needed us." "That's not true," I said calmly. "I needed honesty." She swallowed. "Sabine's panicking." "Good," said. "She says she'll lose everything," Helene whispered. I met her gaze. So did I. Silence stretched between us. "You could make this go away," she said finally. "How?" I asked. "By letting it drop," she replied. I shook my head. "No." Her expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." I raised an eyebrow. "Choice about what?" She stepped back without answering. 2 days later, Evan called with urgency in his voice. "They filed first," he said. "What?" I asked. "They're suing you," he said. "Preemptively. claiming defamation, breach of family agreement, and financial sabotage. I closed my eyes. Let them, I said. They're trying to intimidate you into silence, he continued. It won't work, I replied. I know, he said, but this is going to get public. Good, I said again. The court filing hit local news within hours. The headline wasn't kind. Family dispute escalates amid financial irregularities. The comments were worse. People remembered. They always do when given time. That night, Mira asked, "Why are people talking about you on the computer?" I knelt in front of her. Because I told the truth. Did it hurt? She asked. Yes, I admitted. Is it still hurting? She asked. I smiled. Less every day. She nodded solemnly, as if filing the lesson away. The following week, the discovery phase began. Emails surfaced. Contracts. Internal messages Sabine assumed no one would ever read outside a closed room. One stood out. From Sabine to Helene. If Alara ever notices, we'll say she agreed. She never reads the fine print anyway. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Evan. And for the first time since this began, I felt something close to relief. Not because they were exposed, but because I no longer doubted myself. They hadn't misunderstood me. They had used me. And now the record was complete. On Friday night, as snow began to fall over Briarhaven, I tucked Mira into bed and turned off the light. She whispered, "You're brave." I paused. "No," I said softly. "I'm just done being quiet." Outside, the city moved on. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. They tried to turn my silence into a shield for their choices. Instead, it became the evidence that ended them. The first deposition was scheduled for a Thursday morning, the kind of gray winter day that makes everything feel suspended. I dropped Mira off at school early, kissed her forehead, and told her I'd see her after class. She asked if I was nervous. I told her no, and that surprised me because it was true. By the time I arrived at Evan's office, the conference room already felt too small. Legal pads stacked neatly. Water pitchers untouched. A court reporter adjusting her equipment with practiced indifference. Sabine sat at the far end of the table, jaw tight, hands folded like she was bracing for impact. Helene sat beside her, pale, eyes darting. Roland was late. He arrived 5 minutes after we started, coat still on, breath slightly uneven. He didn't look at me. The oath was administered. The recorder clicked on. And suddenly, years of assumptions had nowhere to hide. Sabine went first. She spoke confidently at first, the way she always did when she thought authority alone could bend reality. She described the company's growth, the pressures, the family support she claimed had always existed. She referred to me as helpful, involved, supportive behind the scenes. Evan let her talk. Then he asked the first question that mattered. "Ms. Winter, when did you first inform Alara Winter that her name had been added as a guarantor on your business loan?" Sabine blinked. Well, she knew. "That's not the question," Evan said calmly. "When did you inform her?" She hesitated. "I don't recall the exact date." "Do you recall informing her at all?" he pressed. Helene shifted beside her. Sabine's voice sharpened. "It was understood." "Understood by whom?" Evan asked. Silence. The court reporter's fingers kept moving. Evan slid a document across the table. "Is this the packet Alara Winter signed?" Sabine glanced at it, then nodded. "Yes." "And is this the page where her name appears as guarantor?" Sabine leaned forward, squinting. "I suppose so." "Suppose," Evan repeated. "You suppose your sister's name was added to a loan without explicit discussion?" Helene interjected. "This feels hostile." The mediator raised a hand. "Let counsel continue." Evan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ms. Winter," he said, "are you aware that implied consent does not apply to financial liability?" Sabine's cheeks flushed. "I'm not a lawyer." "No," Evan agreed. "But you're a business owner." That was when Roland finally spoke. She wanted to help, he said quietly. I looked at him for the first time that morning. I wanted honesty, I replied. The room went still. Helene's deposition was worse. She contradicted herself within the first 10 minutes. Claimed she didn't remember thanking me for the money. Then claimed she did, but thought it was a gift. Then suggested it was a loan they'd emotionally repaid. Evan raised an eyebrow. Can you explain how? Helene faltered. Support. Inclusion. Family. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. The mediator glanced at me, but didn't say anything. When it was my turn, I didn't dramatize. I didn't editorialize. I told the truth. I described the night I signed the packet, the language used, the trust implied, the absence of disclosure. I explained how I found out, not from them, but from a bank letter threatening consequences I didn't agree to carry. I spoke slowly, carefully. The record filled itself. After a break, Evan introduced the email. The one Sabine thought no one would ever see. If Alara ever notices, we'll say she agreed. She never reads the fine print anyway. Sabine stared at the table. Helene closed her eyes. Roland's shoulders slumped. The mediator cleared his throat. We'll take a short recess. In the hallway, Sabine rounded on me. You didn't have to bring that, she hissed. Yes, I said calmly. I did. You're destroying us, she snapped. No, I replied. I stopped protecting you. Roland leaned against the wall, hands shaking. I should have stopped this, he murmured. Yes, I said again. You should have. The next week moved fast. Too fast for anyone trying to hide. More documents surfaced. Not because I dug, but because others started talking. Former employees, old partners, people who had been edged out quietly just like me. Patterns emerged. Sabine didn't just use family. She used proximity, trust, assumptions, and Helene had covered for her. Repeatedly, the lawsuit they filed began to unravel. Claims withdrawn, language softened, threats replaced with requests for resolution. One afternoon, Evan called with a tone I hadn't heard before. They want to settle, he said. I closed my eyes. On what terms? Restoration of your name on the property record, he replied. Removal of liability, compensation, and accountability. I asked. There was a pause. Not publicly. I thought of Mira, of the door closing, of the porch. I'll consider it, I said. That evening, I took Mira for a walk through Ashwood District. Snow crunched under our boots. Lights glowed in windows. Families gathered behind glass. She asked, are they sorry now? I don't know, I said honestly. Do you need them to be? She asked. The question landed quietly, perfectly. No, I said. I needed them to stop. The following Monday, a new message appeared in the extended family group chat. From Marcus. I didn't know the whole story. I do now. And I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. Others followed. Short, awkward, honest. No one defended Sabine anymore. No one used the word misunderstanding. The narrative had shifted. Not because I forced it, because the truth finally had witnesses. The settlement meeting was scheduled for Friday. But on Thursday night, something unexpected happened. Roland emailed me. Just me. No lawyers. No CCs. Subject, I failed you. The message was long. Unfiltered. Not strategic. He admitted he'd known about the guarantor issue earlier than he claimed. That he'd stayed quiet because confronting Sabine felt like choosing sides. That he'd convinced himself silence was neutrality. It wasn't. He apologized not for the optics but for the harm. I didn't reply immediately. I sat with it. On Friday morning, before the meeting, I forwarded his email to Evan. Add this to the record, I said. The settlement went forward. My name was restored. The guarantor claim was nullified. Compensation was agreed upon. No admission of wrongdoing. But the truth didn't need their signature anymore. It was already loose. As we stood to leave, Sabine looked at me for the first time since the deposition. "You always wanted distance," she said bitterly. "No," I replied. "I wanted respect." She turned away. That night, I opened my laptop and archived the record folder. Not deleted. Archived. I didn't need to revisit it. The story was no longer mine alone. On Saturday morning, Mira helped me pack up the last of the documents. We put them in a box labeled history and slid it into the back of the closet. "Is it over?" she asked. "For us," I said yes. She smiled, and for the first time since Thanksgiving morning, I believed it. Somewhere behind closed doors, my family was reckoning with a truth they could no longer rewrite, and I was finally free from the version of myself they tried to erase. The settlement should have been the end of it. On paper, it was clean. My name restored. My liability erased. A wire transfer that closed a chapter one never asked to be written in the first place. Evan called it a rare win. Quiet, contained, efficient. I nodded, thanked him, and told him I'd be in touch if anything else came up. I didn't expect anything else to come up. But silence, once broken, doesn't always stay quiet. The first sign was subtle. A message from a former colleague of Sabine's, someone I vaguely remembered from years ago. We met once at a holiday party. She'd laughed too loudly at Sabine's jokes and avoided my eyes the rest of the night. Her message was short. I saw the filing. If you ever want to compare notes, I kept everything. I didn't respond right away. I showed it to Evan instead. "This is what happens when patterns surface," he said. People realized they weren't alone. Within days, more messages arrived. Some careful, some emotional, some angry at themselves for staying quiet too long. Former employees, vendors, a contractor who'd been paid late and blamed himself for not pushing harder, a junior partner who'd left abruptly and never explained why. Every story was different. The shape of them wasn't. Sabine hadn't just relied on family loyalty. She'd built a system around assumption, around people not wanting to be the one who caused friction, around the idea that if no one else was complaining, maybe the problem was you. It was familiar. I started a new folder, not evidence this time, not defense, context. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew it mattered. Meanwhile, the family fallout continued to unfold without my participation. Helene stopped attending extended gatherings. Marcus told me later she'd claimed health reasons, but the truth leaked anyway. People asked questions, and once questions start, answers follow whether you want them to or not. Sabine went quiet online. No posts. No curated optimism. The absence was louder than any denial could have been. Roland, on the other hand, unraveled slowly. He called once, left a voicemail I didn't listen to, then another, then a text. "I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just need you to know I see it now." I didn't reply. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest about capacity. I didn't owe anyone resolution. Mira noticed the change before I did. "They don't talk about them much anymore," she said one evening as we washed dishes together. "Who?" I asked. "Grandma." "Aunt Sabine," she said casually. "It's like they disappeared." I dried my hands on a towel. "How does that make you feel?" She shrugged. "Lighter." That was the word again. A week later, the unexpected happened. A reporter emailed me. Not Beth. Someone local. Community-focused. Her tone wasn't accusatory or sensational. She'd noticed the trust filing, the reversal, the amended property record. It wasn't public news, she explained, but it wasn't invisible either. I declined an interview. Politely. Firmly. I wasn't interested in telling the story again. Not for clicks, not for validation. But the inquiry planted something. That night, after Mira went to bed, I opened the context folder and read through it from beginning to end. The patterns weren't just financial. They were relational. Who was centered? Who was tolerated? Who was erased? Who benefited from silence? And who paid for it? I thought of the people who'd reached out, the ones who never had leverage, who didn't have proof or timing or support. I thought of myself a year ago, 5 years ago, the version of me who thought if I just stayed kind enough, patient enough, someone would eventually notice. They hadn't, not until the silence broke. The next morning, I called Evan. "I'm not interested in another case," I said, "but I need advice." He listened. Then he said something that stuck. "You don't have to accuse to illuminate," he said. "Sometimes structure does the work for you." That afternoon, I drafted a proposal. Not a lawsuit, not a tell-all, a framework, a small non-profit advisory group. Quiet, confidential, focused on financial transparency in family-run businesses, education, documentation, support, no villains, no public blame, just systems that made erasure harder. I shared the outline with Ms. First. She read it slowly, then looked up at me. "This would have saved you," she said. "Yes," I replied, "and maybe someone else." The response surprised me, not from strangers, but from people I already knew. A former professor, a neighbor who'd left her family business under murky circumstances, a woman from Myra's school whose husband had been cut out of his own company after a restructure. Stories surfaced like they'd been waiting for a place to land. I named the initiative quietly. Clear ledger. Not a rebellion. Not a warning. A record. The first workshop was small. 8 people. Folding chairs. Coffee in mismatched mugs. I didn't share my story in full. I didn't need to. I talked about documentation, boundaries, consent, about the difference between generosity and obligation, about how silence becomes policy when it's rewarded. People asked questions, took notes, breathed differently. I went home that night exhausted and steady in a way I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, the family continued to fracture without me. Marcus called one evening. "They're fighting," he admitted. "A lot." "About what?" I asked. "About you," he said. "About money. About blame. About who knew what." I closed my eyes. "I'm not part of that," I said gently. "I know," he replied. "That's what's making it worse." A week later, Helene emailed me. Just one line. "I wish I had chosen differently." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't understand regret, but because I wasn't its destination. Sabine never reached out. But I heard things. Clients backing away. Partnerships dissolving quietly. A reputation shifting. Not destroyed, just no longer protected by assumption. People were cautious now. They asked for things in writing. They asked follow-up questions. They hesitated. That was enough. One evening, Mira found me organizing files and asked, "Why do you keep all this?" I thought for a moment. "So we don't forget," I said. "Not the hurt, but the lesson." She nodded, satisfied. Later that night, after she fell asleep, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. It was Roland. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I don't want forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted you to know I told the truth today." "To who?" I asked. "The board," he replied. "Everyone." I said nothing. "They didn't react well," he added, but I needed to say it out loud. "I'm glad you did," I said honestly. There was a pause. "I don't expect a place back in your life," he said. "I just wanted to stop lying." "That matters," I replied. We hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done. The next morning, I received an email from the reporter again. This time I said yes. On my terms. No names. No family references. No drama. Just the concept. The article ran quietly. No headlines. No scandal. But it reached the right people. Requests came in. Consultations. Invitations. Clear ledger grew, not fast, but steady. And then, on a cold morning in early spring, something arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a key, attached to a small card with handwriting I recognized. "The house is being sold. I thought you should have this before it changes hands." No signature. I stared at the key for a long time. Then I sat down. I didn't go back. Some doors don't need to be reopened to be closed. That night, Mira and I sat on the floor assembling a bookshelf. She lined up her favorite stories, humming softly. "Do you think they know what they lost?" she asked suddenly. I tightened a screw and considered the question. "I think they know what they protected," I said. "And that tells me enough." She smiled and slid a book into place. The shelf stood straight. So did we. And somewhere behind us, a story that once erased us was finally being told without our permission. The key stayed on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I didn't touch it. I didn't move it. I didn't even turn it over to see which door it belonged to, because I already knew. Some objects carry weight beyond their metal and shape. This one wasn't an invitation. It was an admission. Mira noticed it first. "Is that from them?" she asked, standing on her toes to peer over the counter. "Yes," I said honestly. "Are we going back?" she asked, not with hope but curiosity. I shook my head. "No." She nodded once, satisfied, and went back to her homework. That was when I understood something clearly for the first time. Closure doesn't always come with a conversation. Sometimes it comes with a child who no longer asks why. A week later, the house on Hollowcrest Drive went on the market. The listing photos appeared online before anyone told me. Neutral walls. Staged furniture. Every trace of us gone, not just me, but history. The corner where I used to sit and read. The hallway where Mira took her first unsteady steps during a visit years ago. Even the old tree in the backyard had been cut down. It looked smaller somehow. Less like a home. More like a product. I closed the browser and didn't look again. Clear Ledger continued to grow, quietly and steadily. No press releases. No announcements. Just people finding us when they needed to. Families unraveling the things they were told not to question. People learning the difference between loyalty and leverage. One afternoon, after a session ended, a woman stayed behind. "I wish someone had done this when I was younger," she said. "So do I replied. "But I'm glad you're doing it now," she added. That was enough. The last message came unexpectedly. An email from Sabine. No subject line. Just text. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit overnight, unopened, unread, untouched. In the morning, I made coffee, packed Myra's lunch, tied her shoelaces, kissed her forehead, and only then did I open it. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a list. Names, dates, accounts, everything she had touched, everything she had redirected, everything she assumed no one would ever trace. At the bottom, one sentence. "I'm sending this because I'm tired of holding it alone." I forwarded it to Evan. Then I archived it. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. A month later, Marcus visited. He looked older. Not tired, changed. "They're separating," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. He hesitated. I should have spoken up sooner. "Yes," I said gently. "You should have." He nodded. "I'm trying now." "I see that," I said. Before he left, he looked around my apartment. The books, the drawings on the fridge, Myra's laughter drifting from the other room. "You built something real," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I did." That winter passed differently than any before it. No waiting, no checking phones, no bracing for disappointment disguised as tradition. Mira and I made our own rituals. Pancakes shaped like animals. Friday movie nights. Notes taped to each other's doors. One night she asked, "Do you think people can change?" "Yes," I said, "but not because they lose something. Only because they finally see it." She thought about that. Then she said, "I'm glad we didn't stay where they couldn't see us." So was I. Spring arrived quietly. Clear Ledger received its first grant, small but symbolic. I didn't celebrate with champagne. I celebrated by adding 2 more chairs to the workshop room. The last thing I did with the key was give it to Nissa. "Do whatever you think is right," she said. I smiled. I already did. She dropped it into a donation box for recycled metal. It made a soft sound when it landed. Final. That night, I wrote one last entry in the ledger. Not evidence, not records. Just a sentence. I was never thrown away. I was released. I closed the file. Somewhere behind walls that once shut me out, phones were quiet. Tables were full, but conversations were thin. Doors existed, but not every door leads somewhere you should return to. I turned off the light, checked on mirror one last time, and went to bed knowing something I never had before. The silence had finally changed hands, and this time it answered to me. If this story stayed with you, do me a small favor before you go. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from or what part resonated most. It helps stories like this reach people who need them. And if you want more real, grounded stories about boundaries, truth, and quiet turning points, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next.